The irony of all this, David, is I got into politics and I thought it was going to help me in business. So if you had said to the 20-year-old version of me that by the time I'm 60 or 62 now, that I would be super involved
Mm.
in politics, I would have said, no, no way. I'm a business person. I think you're going to help the country. I think the second move is you are enthralled at the notion that you're going to be inside the circle of significance and you're going to be inside the circle of power.
Hi, it's David here, and a very warm welcome to today's edition of People and Politics. If you've not already done so, please consider subscribing to the show. I'd be very grateful. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation, and I'm thrilled to have with me Anthony Scaramucci. Anthony is the co-host of The Latest Politics US and is a businessman and, of course, former director of communication for Donald Trump. So, welcome to People and Politics. Anthony Scaramucci, thank you so much for coming on my show. I'm really grateful for your time and just for the viewers' purpose. We met in London at the Political Podcast Awards, and then that was a really terrific night. And I noticed you then, and you very kindly agreed to do that, and I'm so grateful for your time. So thanks.
Very happy to be here, David. It's great to see you again. Thanks for having me on, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Good. Well, think so. So, if it's okay with you, I thought we'd speak about the current news for a little while, talk about what's going on in Iran, and then we'll go on to Trump and America and just sort of wider stuff. So, I was going to start because a, a few hours ago, Pete Hegseth looked into the camera and he was talking to the families of the servicemen who lost their life, and he said that we're gonna finish the job, and and I wonder what you think he meant when he said that.
Well, I mean, I'm sure he means a total victory for the United States, I guess, and a full degradation of the Iranian regime. Now, I'm not sure how they're going to accomplish that without ground troops. And so
Mm.
one has to wonder if the U.S. is going to be willing to put ground troops in the area and how big of an expeditionary force they would put in the area. And so I have said on our podcast, I think it would be naive now to assume that the Marine Expeditionary Force that is heading for the area is not going to be likely deployed somewhere by the Strait of Hormuz. And so I think that will cause even bigger problems. I think that level of escalation will get the U.S. in what I think is an escalation trap. So, listen, I was not a supporter of the war. I would have voted against the war. I am an American citizen, and so I do want our American servicemen to be safe, and I do want there to be a positive outcome for our servicemen in the region. And I think it goes without saying, but maybe it's important to say, the Iranian regime, Keir Starmer has said it, Macron has said it, they have been state sponsors of terrorism for 4+ decades. These are bad dudes, David.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that we weren't trying to do something diplomatically to contain them, which is better for everybody and better for the economy if we go in that direction. But we're here now and we're in a little bit of a mess. And listen, I'm not exactly sure what he means, but I hope it means that we can get things to calm down. But it feels like they're going to escalate more, and the markets are telling you that. If you just look at the price of oil today, the markets are telling you that this feels like there's going to be way more escalation than de-escalation.
The energy markets are 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 spiraling out of control, and so when Trump kicked it off 19 days ago, or however long, do you think he had any idea what he was kicking off, or had he even advised what the consequences could be?
I think he admitted to us that he didn't know. I think he admitted to us that he didn't expect the attack on the allies, our Gulf state allies. I think he didn't expect the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. Remember, he dropped some bunker buster bombs on them. There was a 12-day war last year with Israel. They were shooting rockets at each other for a period of time, and then it stopped. And I thought he thought that there would be an attack and there would be limited reprisals back. And I think that in hindsight, I think when they study this, they'll say by killing the supreme leader, I think, these guys probably had a 2 decade plus checklist. If the Israelis or the Americans kill the supreme leader, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go down the checklist and do the following things. Uh, and they did it. Uh, so I don't know. I feel like he admitted this, David. Trump admitted this week. He said, I didn't expect this to happen. I didn't expect
Oh,
that to happen.
well.
So that's the quandary that we're in right now. And it's not super satisfying when you hear the president of the United States say, "Well, I'll know in my bones when this is over." Like and he tells people this. He thinks he's the only guy in the room that's smart. And I think when you think that, there's a level of arrogance there that causes a lot of botched decision making.
Yeah. And then you've just mentioned that, he thinks he's a smart, but when we see him on TV with his crazy hair, his orange face, and the other people sitting on the cabinet table, the Pete Hexas, Jenny Vance, and I know what else are these other guys thinking, but when he's at the ramparts of a scene like, oh man,
Listen, I have been there, and I have
yeah,
explained this to people. I think the first move is you think you're going to help the country. I think the second move is you are enthralled at the notion that you're going to be inside the circle of significance and you're going to be inside the circle of power. And then what ends up happening is you start to use cognitive dissonance and you start to unmoor yourself from your principles. And listen, it doesn't reflect well on me. I was told by my wife and others not to go work for Trump. I did it anyway. And I think that was my ego talking. And I think you got a lot of egomaniacs sitting at the table. And I think they're basically saying to themselves, hey, I'm here at the table and I'm going to be flattering to Trump. I'm going to let Trump do whatever he wants because I want to stay at this table. And I think that's a big worry for me. I call that Potomac fever, David. Like you have this like fever in your mind that you're doing something good when actually something really bad is happening. And one of the problems with Potomac fever, because I did have Potomac fever, is that you don't know you have Potomac fever when you have it. So I think a lot of these guys are going to regret it. I think they're going to look back and say, "Wow, what was I thinking? What was I doing? And how was I allowing this level of damage to happen to my family?"
that's right. I mean, we'll come back to that, and then I want to talk a wee bit more about NATO because in the last few days, I think I'm right in saying, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that I think Trump has more or less said to the European and NATO countries, well, if you want the Strait of Hormuz open. If you want your oil, well, you'll have to put up ships and resources to keep that open. So in some ways, I thought it was almost holding NATO to ransom because he's he's saying that if NATO won't do this, well, he's going to put a NATO in. And so I'm wondering what you thought of that.
Well, I mean, listen, I think it's a great question, but I think that the NATO allies have made the right decision because what you don't want to have happen is a global war as a result of this. I don't think you want World War III. And so, Trump ridicules the allies, he criticizes them, he threatens an attack of Greenland. And I think that, I think it was important for those allies to not go over the line and get into the war with him. I think the defense minister from Germany was like the most blunt about it, where he said that, you know, we're not going to be able to help you anyway. How are we going to be able to put our frigates in there? Your Navy is so much more powerful than ours. Okay. I think he said it best. It was Defense Minister Pistorius, I think, said, what does Trump expect a handful or two handful of European frigates to do in the Strait of Hormuz that the U.S., with its most powerful Navy, cannot do? And I think that Stormer, okay, said that he never thought that this would be a NATO mission.
Hmm.
And I think that I think that they I think they're doing the right thing. I don't want the Chinese engaged in this and the Russians engaged in this and the Europeans engaged in this. And now we're talking about World War III. You want to talk about the energy market? You'll have oil at $300 a barrel, you know?
Uh,
So I hope that that doesn't happen. And we'll have to see, but I hope that doesn't happen. You know what I mean?
yeah, I do. I hope that not happening. But I'm, I'm, I, I'm no fan of Keir Starmer, but I feel it's got a pretty tricky role, because he's taken a lot of flack off Donald and
Hmm.
so we could in particular, and say Donald's taken out his frustrations at the whole Europe,
Hmm.
but he's aimed at Keir Starmer. And I
Listen,
wonder,
I understand all that, but here's something I will say that you have to take not for granted in your country, and that is the process. I think that we have allowed Trump to hijack the constitutional process in our country. And imagine if Keir Starmer was in the Epstein files or Keir Starmer did the things that Donald Trump did, he would be ejected from the government.
yeah,
The people in his own party would say bye bye Keir Starmer. He almost got ejected over the Peter Mandelson situation. So
yeah.
so to me, whatever the disagreements are that you guys have with your political leaders, thank God. And you're looking at somebody on the other side of the Atlantic
Hmm.
that's watching the constitutional process erode here in this very sacred country that I love. I'm going to say to you, whatever the objections are, at least your team is following the process, David. You see what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, it must be pretty frustrating for you guys and a lot of American people, because, there's a lot of people, very, very frustrated at,
Hmm.
at, at Donald. And the people that voted, for him, they're bound to be saying, why do we do that? And I wonder what you think the second half of his presidency will look like.
Well, I mean, listen, I think the number one thing we've got to get through is this war. We have to figure out a way, if possible, to successfully de-escalate this. But I think that it looks like the president is going to lose the midterms. Looks like he will lose the House. He has a very low approval rating, and his negative numbers are incredibly high. They're over 50% now. So he'll probably lose the House. I don't think he loses the Senate. There's a chance he could lose the Senate. But if he loses the House and the Senate, Very, very rough writing for him. Very, very rough writing, I think. Because I think it's going to be a huge investigations, lots of pushing and shoving. It'd be very, very bad for him. Look, you got to get 67 senators to remove him from office. But if you just imagine a scenario where the Senate flips, let's say you've got 53 Democrats, the House will definitely impeach him. He's broken the law. He's broken the emoluments clause. He's done very aggressive things that are outside the norms of the constitutional system. The amount of money that he's made has been breathtaking.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
to me, I think he's really in trouble in a lot of ways. So, I mean, that's me. And so just imagine 10 senators could say, "Hey, we got to get rid of this guy."
Yeah.
Not impossible. So we'll see. But I think it's going to be the back half of his presidency, depending on the outcome of that midterm election, could be brutal for the president.
Have have do you think America has got into the situation because we've seen this massive rise of the right and it's so on going ahead Barack Obama and fairly liberal policy, but what do you think has caused this massive swing towards center right and towards Trump?
Yeah. Good, good. I mean, it's a good point. Listen, I mean, think about what's going on inside of his base. It's interesting, like the polling is quite good for him inside the Republican Party. 95+% of the people are supporting him, but the podcast community that he relied on the support from, guys like Nick Fuentes and guys like Tucker Carlson, they've broken from him. I think Megyn Kelly has sort of split the baby. She sometimes is with him, sometimes not with him. But if his base fractures going into the midterms, I think that's going to be really bad for him.
Yeah, yeah. How big a swing would it take? After the matter, I think he spoke about 10 senators. Is that
Hmm.
what it would take for him to get impeached? But
Yeah.
and is that a big swing?
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be unlikely. I think it
Right.
is a big swing, sir, and I think it would be unlikely. But, you got a catastrophe going on right now. If this continues, I can tell you right now, if we get into Memorial Day in the United States and we have $6.50 per gallon of gasoline,
Yeah.
he's gonna lose a lot of support because remember, gasoline is a regressive tax. The rich people, they can spend the money on the gas, they have no problem. The poor people, it eats into their disposable income. It's very painful for poor and middle class people if they've got to drive to work and they've got triple the gas prices that they had since the beginning of the president's term. So I'm not saying that this can't be resolved. But I'll tell you what, sir, they put U.S. Marines on the ground in Iran. That's a major escalation of this thing,
Yeah.
and that could happen. It's not impossible.
Yeah, a kid who I said there's a big deployment on the way, and presumably they're on the way there for a reason. So I suppose we'll find out soon whether or not that's gonna happen. Um, I wanted to ask that when did you first come into contact with Donald Trump?
Well, remember, I'm a New Yorker. I grew up here. And so my first contact with him, meeting him face to face, I was 31 years old. I was at Goldman Sachs. It was 1995. One of my bosses took me to a meeting with him. And this people probably won't like me saying this because he's unpopular in your neck of the woods. But at that time, if you were a middle income person like me, a working class person, you looked up to him. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. He had this big Trump Tower. He had all these fancy cars and planes. You thought he was rich and you were not. And so you looked up to him, and weirdly, we aspired to be like him. And remember, the rappers wrote a lot of songs about Donald Trump. So, we have now gone from that 31 years ago to the disaster that we're in. But I didn't know him, but I had a big impression of him, and I was excited to meet him 31 years ago. I didn't really develop a relationship with him until he started The Apprentice. I was at CNBC when he was at NBC, and so we had a rapport with each other. I wouldn't call us friends. I think that would be a misnomer of describing the relationship. But then when I worked for Governor Romney in 2012, we got a little closer. We did some business together. We raised some money for Governor Romney. And then by 16, I was with Jeb Bush, and Trump was running, and he asked me to join him if Jeb came out of the race, which I did. And obviously, I've told people that was a mistake for me because it led to this, horrific experience that I had inside the White House. But then again, there's a silver lining, David, because maybe I wouldn't be meeting you if I didn't have that experience. So you have to take the good and bad in life. But if you ask my wife, I've done a lot of stupid things, but working for Donald Trump was probably at the top of the list.
But you didn't work for him for very long, whether or not that was his call or you could.
Well, I didn't work for him very long in the White House, sir. Remember, I did work for him for almost a year on the campaign, right? I'm not right. I would have never gotten to the White House if I didn't
Yeah,
work for him on the campaign.
you know. Well, when the cameras are switched off and there's no audience, and to know you're in his company, what what's he like then? Is he just the same?
Well, you see, I think people are always surprised by his up close and personal charm.
Uh,
I think that you would be blown away that he is excoriating Gavin Newsom on Truth Social and through his tweeting. And then when he's with Gavin, he's very charming and very approachable. And I think people would be blown away at that dichotomy. He's a little bit of a keyboard bully. He's a keyboard warrior. But when you're in your presence, he doesn't really like a lot of conflict. And so even with the journalists that he supposedly despises, he has a pretty good rapport with them privately, you know?
Uh, it's like 20 years ago when he was buying land in Scotland to build golf courses. The the Scottish government couldn't get enough of him, and they were desperate for him to come with his money and make jobs. But now, uh, when it's coming, they always say, "Oh, it's not welcome here," and it's like, well, he's here because you want him here,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
that's
it's a good point.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah. Can, so U.S. school, you went to Harvard Law School. You did law and exam. Can you remember what you wanted to do when you were at school?
Yeah, I would like to tell you that there was a lot of thought put into it, but I'll expose to you my level of immaturity in my early 20s. I was thinking about what to do my junior year. And in 1985, there was a newspaper report that they were paying lawyers at these big Wall Street law firms $65,000 a year. I think they pay 300 now, but it was
Yeah,
$65,000 a year. My dad at that time was making 32,000.
yeah,
He was a crane operator out here on Long Island, and I was thinking to myself, "Wow, that's double my dad's pay," and it's only my first year. And so there was a little bit of financial conservatism in the decision making, but I was like, I'm going to go to law school, which will guarantee me the income that I'll need to support a family. And I didn't have a lot of in-depth thinking about it. So when you say, well, what was I thinking about doing? I was thinking about making money to
yeah.
pay off my school debt and to sort of have a buffer financially because I grew up with a lot of financial anxiety, frankly. So it wasn't great strategic thought. When I got to law school, I realized that maybe the law wasn't really for me. And that's when I tried to pursue a job at Goldman, which I ended up getting a job at Goldman Sachs in 1989. And I worked there for 7 years, and then I was able to take that experience and build a few successful businesses. The irony of all this, David, is I got into politics and I thought it was going to help me in business. Excuse me. I didn't realize that I would be this involved with politics. If you had said to the 20-year-old version of me that by the time I'm 60 or 62 now, that I would be super involved
Mm.
in politics, I would have said, no, no way. I'm a business person. But we're here now. And Donald Trump has certainly changed the landscape of all of this for all of us.
Yeah.
We got a lot more people involved in politics because of Donald Trump than ever before, frankly.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I was you talking, I think, a couple of days ago about aspiration of opportunity and America being the place of uh, opportunity. Do you think it's still that? Is there still an opportunity for everybody?
I do think that. I do think that there's still an opportunity for everybody, but I think it's gotten harder. I think the kids that I grew up with in my neighborhood, at least those kids, let's say I was born in the 1960s, kids that were born in the 1990s or the early 2000s, they probably have a harder time. It's, you know, the American dream, is it still alive? I believe it is. Could we do things to renew the American dream? And could we come up with policies that would be better for us as Americans? Yes, I do believe that. But I don't want to be that negative bandwagon person saying that it's dead. It's not dead. It's just been impaired. We've made things for the middle income people and for the working class people harder to afford. And so
Yeah.
that complicates things. My dad, $32,000 a year, he bought a $16,000 house, and we
Wow.
lived in it and we lived in it very comfortably. That house is like $780,000 now. It's not a house that my parents could have afforded even today. His income, my dad's now deceased, but his 1976 wages when I priced them in 2016, 40 years later, David, they were down about 27%. So meaning his purchasing power was way down,
That's
and it would have been impossible for him to afford the lifestyle that he was able to provide for us. And I think that's an important thing. And I think there's some tragedy in that. I think we, as a group of people, we can fix that. But we need people in the jobs to think about it in a more macro way, less about their own political preservation and their own political power, and more about serving the public.
Yeah. Um, Obviously, no, I know a little about opportunities for disabled people in the Ukraine, and to know the disabled community are are significantly less likely to find employment here. And I wonder if it was a similar situation in America, or do you see the same people working on the trading floors, on the insurance companies? Do you see many disabled people working there, or is it still like it is here?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So, if I don't honestly know the answer to that. I can only give you like my feeling, but here's the thing that I would say to you. My feeling is it's worse, but I think I would say something more broadly to you, sir. I would say that we have to be very careful not to get the collective biases of the people that we hang out with. Meaning, if I'm hanging out with wealthy people, well, okay, I think everything's fine. You got to go to areas, you got to go to areas where they're less wealthy, where you realize, okay, well, it's not fine, and why isn't it fine, and how can we make it better?
Yeah, true. That did the Americans turn a corner? Do you think? As you said earlier on, the president's losing a lot of popularity, and do you
Hmm.
think people were realizing that this attitude of them against us, is
Yeah,
not in everybody's interest?
yeah. I mean, you're right on the pulse, David, of what's going on, and That's the danger of where we are right now in the society. We don't want an us versus them, and we don't want an intellectual or an ideological or a class civil war, right? We don't want that. So we have to figure that out.
And, and we've got 2 years of Donald Trump left. Have you any idea of what will transpire after that? Or is that a
I mean,
guess?
listen, it's going to be too long, 2.5 long years, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's going to be long, long years. And I guess I'm very surprised that the Republicans that they haven't gotten together with the Democrats, gone down to the White House and said, "Hey, if you don't knock this off, we're going to team up and remove you from office. So we just got to give you the heads up." And I'm just surprised they haven't done that. I'm surprised that they're that afraid of them.
Have you any idea who the next Republican candidate could be? Uh,
See, I think, and I've said this repeatedly on my podcast, that Marco Rubio and JD Vance are going to be heavily damaged by this term, by this administration. I don't think they make it. I think it'll be somebody different, somebody that we haven't really thought of right now. That's me. We'll have to see. But remember the best thing that the Republicans have going for them in my country, David, are the Democrats. The Democrats are in complete disarray. So
yeah, great.
I just want to say this to you. I want you to think about this for a second because diesel prices, this is diesel fuel is what's used for the big trucking, which
Yeah.
impacts the cost of goods because we're moving goods around the country using diesel fuel. Diesel fuel in the last 15 days went from $3.20 a gallon to almost $6.
Mm,
And so I just want you to see how damaging that's going to be to
yeah.
the cost umbrella of the United States in terms of the goods and services at the supermarket, in the retail stores, etc.
And it's happening here as well. And I think we're running into a big problem here because the gas prices, for example, are going to have spiked. And it's not been passed on to the consumer yet. But come the autumn, it will be. I think there'll be a lot of people in deeper fuel poverty here. So I think it's a war that's going to affect, everybody across the sort of Western world who are dependent on the Middle East for energy.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, it's a bad situation. So I have time for one or two more questions. Is that okay? Because I had an 11:30 that I didn't.
but but finally, once again, I want to thank you so much for
Oh,
giving
it's
me
my pleasure.
for
David, it's
giving
my pleasure. It was great. It was great to
your
meet you at the
time.
Political Podcast Awards, and I want to be supportive of you. So it's my pleasure to be on the show, sir.
And so yeah, thank you very much, and I hope we can keep in contact and do it again.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.